Good morning, everybody. How are we doing today? It's a nice Sunday morning. Good time for some coffee and a podcast now, isn't it? So, let's get the fun stuff out of the way. Oh, that sucks that you didn't have time for coffee. That's why you wake up early enough to be able to grab your coffee. That's what I do. Anyway, for those interested in seeing live gaming or the podcast being recorded and streamed live, you can find it at twitch.tv/DJ_funky_fresh. You can find all the videos I do on YouTube, including the recorded version of the podcast at youtube.com/DJ_funkyfreshgaming. And of course, you can find the podcasts on Spotify and SoundCloud. You just look for Funky Bunch at Sunday Brunch Podcast. That's about it. So anyway, we've been hitting it pretty hard with a bunch of non-gaming things, so I figured let's do a gaming topic today. And a very fun game series is, of course, Bioshock. One that we've streamed and recorded and posted. And I figured, hey, let's talk about it, shall we? Yes. So, Bioshock. Let's see. A good quote that sums up Bioshock by Andrew Ryan. A man has a choice. I chose the impossible. I built a city where the artist would not fear the censor, where the great world would not be constrained by the small, where the scientists would not be bound by petty morality. I chose to build rapture, but my city was betrayed by the weak. So I ask you, my friend, if your life were the prize, would you kill the innocent? Would you sacrifice your humanity? We all make choices, but in the end, our choices make us. So, Bioshock is the first game in the Bioshock series, released in 2007. Like, dang. Like, this game still holds up very well. Almost exactly 13 years later, it came out on August 21st in North America. So it is considered Bioshock is a genetically enhanced action-adventure, a horror-themed FPS by Irrational Games. You are exploring the underwater dystopia of Rapture. And you are urged to turn everything into a weapon, either by biologically modifying your own body with plasmids, hacking devices and systems, upgrading weapons, crafting new ammo variants, and experimenting with different battle techniques. The philosophy, architecture, and society of Rapture were strongly inspired by the works of Ayn Rand, especially from the novel Atlas Shrugged. So if you really enjoyed Bioshock, and you want to get something similar to it, read, or I think it's a movie, but take a look at Atlas Shrugged. Let me actually take a real quick look for that. Let's see. It's a book, and it's a documentary. Yeah. But I would recommend reading the book instead of watching the movie, personally. Let's see. This game is described by the developers as the spiritual successor of System Shock 2. So, it's always something I've considered taking a look at, but it has not happened yet. So, overview of the plot. Bioshock takes place in 1960, where Jack, the sole survivor of a plane crash in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, discovers the entrance to the recluse underwater city of Rapture at the end of a civil war which left most of it in disrepair. Jack, finding himself trapped in a strange and dangerous dystopia and with only a mysterious man called Atlas helping him, Jack has no choice but to fight for his survival against Rapture's mutated and monstrous denizens, using all types of weapons and genetic enhancements as he searches for a way to return to the surface. I forgot to say this earlier, but this will be a spoiler-heavy podcast today, too. So, we will be telling things, we will be giving away plot points, and discussing things. So, now, what is Rapture exactly? Let's go into Rapture and talk about it since, we've got Bioshock 1 and 2 all taking place in Rapture. So, once again, the best quote to describe Rapture is, once again, from Andrew Ryan. And it is, "I am Andrew Ryan, and I am here to ask you a question. Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? No, says the man in Washington, it belongs to the poor. No, says the man in the Vatican, it belongs to God. No, says the man in Moscow, it belongs to everyone." I rejected those answers and said I chose something different. I chose the impossible. I chose Rapture. A city where the artist would not fear the censor, where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small, and with the sweat of your brow, Rapture can become your city as well. So Rapture, which was also known as the North Atlantic Project and the Rapture Colony, is a massive underwater city forged from the personal dreams of Andrew Ryan to escape from the political, social, and religious anxieties of a post-World War II world. It was first established in November 5th of 1946, and construction of the city itself finished in the late 1951. It is located at 63 degrees... I don't know how to actually read it. It's 63 degrees 2 north, 29 degrees 55 west, which is approximately 433 kilometers west of Reykjavik, which is the capital of Iceland. So, what is the purpose of Rapture? Andrew Ryan named his city after the goal he set in mind, to create a paradise free from all the people he saw as parasites, a place of true rapture. In terms of its philosophical underpinnings, Rapture can be best described as a gulch, which is a term derived from the novel Atlas Shrugged, which is a localized underground economic and social community of free-minded individuals. It differs from a commune in that it is uniquely freedom-focused, and so upholds individual and property rights rather than operating by the rules of a collective community. The original goal of Rapture was to create a capitalist society free of any religious and government interference of any kind, where any citizen could prosper from his or her own gain without having to fulfill the wants of others. The world's best and brightest would be granted freedom of will and choice in Rapture, unrestrained by government, religion, and other established institutions. Instead of abiding by the traditions and moral systems imposed by those institutions, values such as logic and scientific reason were to guide the inhabitants in their pursuit of achievement. This would-be utopia had its flaws. In Rapture's pure capitalistic society, there were no publicly funded social programs, and everything within the city was privately owned and came with a price. This included the city's food, healthcare, sanitation, and even its oxygen supply. The police and fire departments were subscription-based private companies, such as Papadopoulos Police Department and Fontaine Firefighters. There were less restricted norms for businesses and labor, allowing unscrupulous business practices, but with competition and customers' choice balancing the market. This system alienated Rapture's less fortunate citizens, who, when hard times came, began to resent Ryan's society as cold-hearted and elitist. Andrew Ryan's hostility and growing paranoia towards parasites, and others exploiting Rapture's freedoms to seize wealth and power, kicked in motion a set of events that would ultimately lead to Rapture's downfall. So, yeah. The rise and fall of Rapture. So from its initial opening to inhabitation in 1946 onwards, Rapture flourished, newly built with the latest technological marvels from the surface and possessing an active and growing environment supported by wealth, idealism, and a new population. Rapture seemed well on its way to becoming a capitalist utopia in Andrew Ryan's image. Compared to most of the surface world, Rapture could indeed be seen as a utopia, with everyone having the right to freely reap the rewards of their own labor without outside interference. However, despite its apparent success, cracks soon began to emerge within Rapture society, specifically between the social classes. Being a pure individualist capitalist society that focused exclusively on the pursuit of profit, Rapture subtly began to condone things such like greed, elitism, and other negative aspects related to capitalism, which soon began to drive a wedge between the upper and lower class of society. Being devoid of any social programs, charities, and other similar organizations formed to support the less fortunate elements of society, due to Andrew Ryan seeing such programs as parasitic and forbidding them. The poor of Rapture were left with little to no means of improving their economic standing, trapping them at the bottom of the Rapture society. The economic system of Rapture alienated the city's less fortunate citizens who, when hard times came, began to resent Ryan's society. Andrew Ryan's hostility and paranoia of the parasites and others exploiting Rapture's freedoms to seize power resulted in him issuing an edict, declaring that all contact with the outside world would be severed in order to ensure Rapture's safety by keeping the city's existence secret from the surface world, now in the midst of the Cold War. Things seemed to take a turn for the better at some point between 1948 and 1952, when an incident in Rapture's docks led to the discovery of Adam, a chemical substance that, if refined into a special serum called plasmid and used alongside an actuating chemical called Eve, would allow the user to alter their genetic code without any limits whatsoever aside from their own imagination, allowing the user to change themselves according to their own design and needs. This led to a huge upswing in productivity, and Adam soon became an integral part of Rapture's society, ushering in a golden age of productivity and creativity. Unfortunately for Rapture, Adam turned out to be both a blessing and a curse. While it allowed for unrestricted genetic engineering with only one's imagination being the limit, it also turned out to be extremely addictive. After using Adam, the user would develop an extremely strong addiction to it, forcing them to take more Adam to stave off the addiction, as otherwise the withdrawal symptoms would drive them insane, which served only to worsen the addiction even more and exacerbate the need for Adam, forcing the user to consume even more Adam with every subsequent dose, becoming bigger than the last, escalating the cycle and bringing with itself an insatiable hunger for more Adam and a gradual mental degradation and breakdown. This enabled a man named Frank Fontaine to build a criminal empire through smuggling goods from the surface, allowing him to obtain the funds to finance the creation of a sprawling Adam industry. The mass production of Adam only served to exacerbate Rapture's addiction to the chemical, with it soon becoming vital for Rapture's continued function. Everyone wanted Adam, everyone needed Adam, and as a result of that, Fontaine's power and influence over Rapture increased greatly. He soon begun to draw plans for exploiting the class differences of Rapture to overthrow Andrew Ryan and take over Rapture for himself. The downfall of society. Initially admiring Frank Fontaine's success and citing him as a prime example of the kind of individual Rapture was aiming to create, Andrew Ryan soon began to suspect Fontaine of various crimes, including the ongoing smuggling problem. With Fontaine's growing criminal influence over Rapture's less fortunate inhabitants and his monopoly on Adam production, he was becoming a powerful rival to Ryan, who was beginning to threaten both the social order of Rapture as well as Ryan's rule. Things finally came to a head in 1958 when Ryan attempted to arrest Fontaine, but Fontaine, resisting arrest, was killed in the ensuing shootout between his goons and Ryan's forces. After Fontaine's apparent death, Ryan, with the support of the oligarchic Rapture Central Council, assumed controls of Fontaine's corporate assets. The population's worsening addiction to Adam soon brought with itself a great deterioration of order, followed by widespread civil unrest. This was further worsened when a revolutionary named Atlas rallied all the poor people who had flocked to Fontaine's poorhouses and begun waging a guerrilla war against Rapture's security forces. This forced Andrew Ryan to take drastic measures to restore order, as seen by his resorting to increasingly authoritarian means to maintain control, with him dissolving the Rapture Central Council and installing himself as the despotic ruler of Rapture. Ryan began to began issuing even more restrictive laws to limit people's freedom and introducing harsher punishments towards problem citizens. And that right there is what happens to most utopias, if you think about it. You start fearing for your power and your spot at the head, that you start restricting people. And then you turn into a normal government society. On December 31st, 1958, a massive working-class uprising, the 1958 New York New Year's Eve riots, was started by Atlas, with Atlas's men carrying out attacks against many upper-class locations, such as the Kashmir restaurant. This soon escalated into an all-out civil war between Atlas and Ryan, made worse by the mental degradation caused by atom addiction in the city's population. Traditional projectile weapons were used and were soon joined by plasmids, first by Atlas's splicers and later employed by Ryan's supporters. As the conflict went on, a plasmid-based arms race began to take place, with both Atlas's and Ryan's forces beginning to use more and more plasmids and Eve on themselves to gain an edge against their adversaries. As was quoted by Bill McDonough in one of his audio journals, this was not about who could build the best guns and the biggest bombs. Instead, it was about who could become less of a man and more of a monster. The main conflict lasted for around 4 months, with the continuing violence causing great destruction in cohesive society and serious damage to the infrastructure within Rapture. In the multiplayer mode of Bioshock 2, the player gets to participate in the warfare, which was part of the fall of Rapture. In the end, a large portion of the population became insane, atom-addicted splicers, while the rest were killed by the splicers. They committed suicide or died of starvation. The destruction and devastation of the Rapture Civil War brought society in Rapture to an end. So now we get to the events of Bioshock in 1960. Let's see. Yeah, let's jump back to here. So, like I said, Bioshock takes place in 1960, where Jack, the sole survivor of the plane crash, is the main character. We play as Jack. We find ourselves trapped within Rapture when we find it, and Atlas decides that he wants to help us out. So, let's see. So, Atlas assists Jack in making his way to safety via the surface radio found in the submarine vessel. Atlas, being the absolute gentleman, is always politely asking if we would assist him. So, Andrew Ryan believes Jack to be an agent of a surface nation and decides to use Rapture's automated systems and his pheromone-controlled splicers against him. Atlas tells Jack that the only way he can survive is to use the abilities granted by plasmids, and that he must kill the Little Sisters, accompanied by their hulking, armored protectors, the Big Daddies, to extract their atom. Inadvertently, Jack crosses paths with Dr. Tenenbaum, who, instead of killing the Little Sisters, urges him to save the Little Sisters instead. And she gives us a plasmid that will safely kill the embedded sea slug in each Little Sister, which will revert them from the monsters they became into normal little girls. Atlas says that his wife and child have been hiding on a submarine and directs Jack towards it. Just as Jack and Atlas reach the bay where it is located, Ryan has it destroyed, and enraged, Atlas guides Jack on a mission to kill Ryan. Eventually, Jack confronts Ryan in his office, where the latter is just casually playing golf. Ryan reveals the truth that he has pieced together. Jack was actually born in Rapture a mere 4 years ago, and was genetically modified to mature rapidly. He is Ryan's illegitimate son through an affair with Jasmine Jolene, an exotic dancer. Ryan further reveals that after purchasing Jack's embryo, Frank Fontaine designed him to obey orders that are preceded or followed by the specific phrase, "Would you kindly?" Jack was then sent to the surface when the Rapture Civil War started to put him beyond Ryan's reach. When the conflict between Fontaine and Ryan reached a stalemate, Jack was sent instructions to board a flight with a package and use its contents, a revolver, to hijack and crash the plane near the lighthouse. enabling him to return to Rapture as a tool of Fontaine. Because Jack was Ryan's son, he could freely use Rapture's bathysphere network, which had been locked out to everyone except those with Ryan's genetic ballpark. Finally, Ryan has Jack kill him, wanting to die on his own terms. So, there is something that people have always asked about Bioshock. So, you see there are Vita Chambers. When you die, you get resurrected. That is that is very true within this world. There are Vita Chambers where if you were to die, you come back to life from within them. And people always ask, well, if that's the case, why did Andrew Ryan die and not come back if he was the god of the place? It's like, Andrew Ryan, in demonstrating the fact that he has free will, and you, Jack, were a slave and you did not, that he could choose his own death. Because a man chooses and a slave obeys, I believe is the exact phrase he uses. And so he chose to disconnect himself from it and die on his own terms. So, with Ryan's death, Jack realizes too late that Atlas has also been using the trigger phrase to control him. Atlas reveals himself to be Frank Fontaine, who faked his death to throw Ryan off his trail and take control of the city. Leaving Jack at the mercy of the reactivated security systems, Dr. Tenenbaum and her little sisters help Jack escape through the vent system, where he falls and loses consciousness. When Jack awakes, Dr. Tenenbaum had already deactivated some of the conditioned responses, such as the trigger phrase itself, and assists him in breaking the remaining ones. Among them, one that would eventually have stopped his heart. With the help of the little sisters, Jack is able to track down Fontaine. The mob boss, having been cornered, injects himself with vast amount of Adam and becomes an inhuman monster. Jack battles him, eventually prevailing and allowing the little sisters to subdue and extract Adam from his body, killing him. There are 3 endings that are possible depending on how the player interacted with the little sisters. So, in a game about having no control, you actually had a lot of control when it came down to the endings, just based upon your little sisters. If the player rescued all of the little sisters, therefore saving all their lives, the ending shows 5 little sisters returning to the surface with Jack and living full lives under his care, including their graduation from college, getting married, and having children. It ends on a heartwarming tone with an elderly Jack surrounded on his deathbed by all 5 of them of the adult little sisters. If the player harvested and therefore killed all of the little sisters, the game ends with Jack turning on the sisters after defeating Fontaine, presumably killing them all and taking their Adam. Tenenbaum narrates what occurred, condemning Jack and his actions, voice thick with anger and contempt. Later in the second ending, a ballistic missile submarine carrying nuclear missiles comes across the wreckage of a plane and is suddenly surrounded by bathyspheres containing splices. The splicers kill all hands on board the sub and take control of it. And of course the final, if the player saves some of the little sisters but killed a fair few as well, the ending is visually identical to the second one, though the tone of Tenenbaum's voice is a sad one, as opposed to an angry one. So yeah, that is Bioshock, really. Let's see, is there anything... I can read a bit more from this one, so this is going back to just the history of Rapture. So I'm going between reading the actual stuff from Bioshock and the history of Rapture, so we'll read these 2 quick paragraphs, so. By 1960, Fontaine, posing as Atlas, was feeling the pressure of Ryan's legion of pheromone-controlled splicer forces. In a last-ditch effort to turn the tide in his favor, he summoned his mind-controlled assassin Jack to track down and kill Ryan and enable Fontaine to take over the city. After a year of ceaseless civil war and ruinous violence, Rapture is severely damaged and teetering on the edge of total collapse. Water constantly leaks in virtually every corner and splices roam about the passageways, looting or killing everything in sight. As bad as it is, though, Rapture is still being held together by Ryan. Automated repair systems and the Big Daddies keep the city from falling apart. Mistaking Jack for CIA or a KGB spy sent to report Rapture's location, Ryan sends waves of spices to deal with them. To no avail. Losing his patience, Ryan chooses to destroy Arcadia's trees, depriving the city of its oxygen supply, and trapping Jack in an area-wide lockdown. Jack, with the help of Julie Langford, manages to restore the foliage of Arcadia and continues on to Hephaestus in Ryan's office. As Jack journeys on through Rapture, unabated by the bathysphere lockdown, the spices, and the security measures, Ryan slowly begins to piece together Jack's true identity. When Jack draws near, Ryan, in a final attempt to prevent Fontaine from gaining the city, activates a self-destruct system for all of Rapture. Jack finally manages to kill Ryan and stop the self-destruct sequence, and then is commanded to turn over control of Rapture's central control and the whole of city to Atlas. Fontaine reveals himself, his Atlas persona having been a con job, and betrays Jack by ordering his execution. Jack escapes and hunts down, then kills a massively spliced Fontaine in his towering hideout. So, yeah. That was Bioshock. Now we can look at Bioshock 2. So, a good quote for Bioshock 2 is, "For every choice, there is an echo. With each act, we change the world. One man chose a city free of law and God, but others chose corruption, and so the city fell. If the world were reborn in your image, would it be paradise or perdition?" Sophia Lamb. So, Bioshock 2 is the second game in the series and the sequel to Bioshock, and it continues the grand storyline of the underwater metropolis of Rapture, released in 2010 of February. Yeah. So, the plot of 2. Set 8 years after the event of the first game, Bioshock 2 follows Subject Delta, a prototype Big Daddy, sent on a quest to reunite with the little sister he was previously bonded to, Eleanor, across a changed and even more dangerous Rapture. The second game explores more brutal gameplay than its predecessor, with new enemies, weapons, plasmids, and gene tonics. Not tonics. It also offers a much different version of Rapture, ruled by ideals completely opposed to the vision of Andrew Ryan. So in 1968, which is roughly 8 years after the events of Bioshock, Rapture is now under the control of ex-missionary and psychiatrist Sophia Lamb, whose ideas for human progression are a sharp contrast to the city's deceased founder Andrew Ryan. While Ryan believed in the genius of the individual, Lamb believes in a collective effort and the power of the community, as well as a philosophy surrounding butterfly imagery, indicating rebirth. She considers Rapture's failure to be undeniable proof that the self is the root of all evil and suffering. Under Sophia's rule, the first generation of Little Sisters into adolescence. The Big Sisters, so they are now known, are highly aggressive and have the ability to use plasmids absorbed from gathering as a child. Sophia sends Big Sisters out to coastlines along the Atlantic, kidnapping little girls and turning them into new Little Sisters. At a New Year's Eve celebration in 1958, Subject Delta, the first Big Daddy to be successfully pair-bonded to a little sister, is starting his usual rounds with his little sister when she races ahead and is attacked by a group of splicers. Naturally, Delta defends his gatherer, but is stopped when the last splicer hits him with a hypnotized plasmid. Sophia Lamb informs him that his little sister is actually her daughter, Eleanor Lamb, before forcing him to take a pistol to his own head and pulling the trigger. 10 years later, Delta is revived at a Vita chamber and begins to receive telephonic messages from Eleanor pleading for help. Delta encounters Dr. Bridget Tenenbaum, who tells him that in order to save Eleanor and stop Lamb, he must travel across the ruins of Rapture and Fontaine Futuristics, where Eleanor is held. If he does not, his bond will stop his heartbeat if he strays too far from his little sister, preventing him from escaping Rapture and eventually killing him. On his journey, Delta is aided by Tenenbaum's new ally, Augustus Sinclair, a businessman and confidence trickster. Delta also receives aid from Eleanor, who uses her psychic connection to the new Little Sisters to leave care packages and messages for him throughout Rapture. Through audio logs scattered throughout Rapture, Delta discovers that, against Andrew Ryan's better judgment, Lamb was originally brought to Rapture to help those who were struggling to cope with underwater life. However, Lamb used the therapy sessions as a means to brainwash her patients into joining a cult she called the Rapture Family. Soon, Lamb was confronting and defeating Ryan in public debates. In response to this new threat, Ryan asked Sinclair to deal with it. Sinclair used reporter Stanley Poole as a mole within the family to compromise Lamb, who was then arrested and sent to Rapture's prison, Persephone, leaving her daughter Eleanor in the care of her trusted lieutenant and singer, Grace Holloway. When Eleanor confronted Stanley about how he had corrupted Lamb's property in her absence, Stanley panicked and sold her to one of Frank Fontaine's orphanages, which led to her transformation into a little sister. Delta then discovers that Lamb plans to use Adam to transfer her daughter into a superhuman being with all the knowledge of Rapture's intellectual elite. Lamb will then use the same conditioning methods used on Jack to destroy Eleanor's sense of self, brainwashing her into acting only for her goals. Sinclair's agenda also becomes clear. He plans to take control of Rapture from Lamb, cannibalize its technology, and sell it to the surface world. Delta's journey is halted by the first block of ice blocking the door down to the train station at Ryan Amusements. He enters the park to find the incinerate plasmid to melt the ice. Lamb, however, is not eager to see Delta and locks down the railway in an attempt to stop him from getting to Eleanor. This forces him to stop him to pop his drop and get the override key from Grace Holloway, who holds a deep grudge against subject Delta. When Delta finally meets her face to face, she reveals to him that he broke Grace's jaw many years ago when she attempted to approach a transformed Eleanor, ending her career as a singer. Delta is then given a choice to either kill or spare Grace. With the key in possession, Delta departs. Delta's efforts are once again hindered by another lieutenant of Lamb's, whose father, Simon Wells, a blindly zealous splicer who believes that Eleanor is the key to paradise, fires a torpedo at our car, which badly damages and hurts us and hurls us from the craft. To get another functioning train car in Dionysus Park, Delta must go to Siren Alley, where Wells has set up a temple for the Rapture family. After killing Simon, we have to drain Dionysus Park, but then Lamb overloads the pumps, flooding Siren Alley. We enter Dionysus Park and find the train cars are locked down, courtesy of Stanley Poole, who promises to open up the trains if Delta empties Dionysus Park of its little sisters. As Delta takes care of them, Poole reveals he wrote an article about Delta. Delta was once an ordinary man, nicknamed Johnny Topside. He found Rapture while on a diving expedition and became something of a celebrity within Rapture's walls. Andrew Ryan, however, was convinced that Johnny was a spy sent by the CIA or KGB, much like when he encountered Jack. Eventually, Ryan made him into a Big Daddy, codenamed Subject Delta. After completing his mission, Delta is about to leave when Lamb informs him that Stanley turned him into Ryan and is responsible for his transformation into a Big Daddy. He's then given the choice of either killing or sparing the man. Finally, we get to Fontaine Futuristics. Delta meets a man by the name of Gilbert Alexander, who is now deeply insane due to absorbing massive amounts of Adam. Delta follows taped recordings left by Gil's sane self and finds his way to a hidden plasmid lab where there's a horribly mutated Gil. Delta retrieves a gene sample and uses it to get to Persephone where Eleanor is held, but before leaving, Delta is once again given the choice of ending or sparing Gil's life. Delta enters Persephone and finds Eleanor locked within a quarantine chamber with Sophia. Before Delta can enter the chamber, Sophia smothers the sleeping Eleanor with a pillow. This stops her heart long enough for Delta's body to shut down and he is knocked unconscious. Delta is captured by Lamb and his pair bond with Eleanor is severed, weakening his odds in the process. However, Eleanor sends a special plasmid to Delta that allows him to take control of a little sister. She reveals that she has been closely observing his actions not only through the pair bond, but through her psychic connection to the new little sisters. And depending on Delta's actions throughout Rapture, she is either a spirited, rebellious young woman determined to win her freedom, or a ruthless cynic who only thinks for her own survival and welfare. Following Eleanor's instructions, Delta brings pots of Big Sister armor, allowing her to free Delta and fight by his side. They resolve to make their escape from Rapture using Sinclair's escape pod. Lamb, upon seeing her daughter defy her, plans to set off bombs that will send them plummeting to the bottom of the sea. During their escape, Delta is forced to kill Sinclair, who had been captured by Lamb and transformed into a Big Daddy. Eleanor and Delta make it to the escape pod, but a final trap set by Lamb mortally wounds Delta. Inside the flooded escape pod with her mother, Eleanor makes the choice to either save or kill Lamb. Depending on the choices made by the player throughout the game, the player will receive different endings. In the good ending, Eleanor will use her Big Sister needle to absorb Delta's atom and conscious so that they can be together forever, with Delta guiding Eleanor's actions and drives. In the bad ending, she brutally harvests Delta's essence and atom, heralding the birth of a monster. However, if Delta demonstrated some form of compassion through his journey, then Delta will have the option to stop and sacrifice his life to give Eleanor a chance at redemption. So, that's the main story of, 2, with, yeah. So, it's kind of hard to tell what the main focus of Bioshock 1 and 2 are. Because obviously, it's really big about philosophical, viewpoints as well as control. But at the same time, there's those hints of religion in it as well. But I think it's more upon philosophy and control. Because if you really think about it, in 1 and 2, 1, you literally have no control because you have been genetically modified to obey. And you have no choice to do that until you can break free. And yet they actually give you the biggest choice of saving or killing the little sisters. You're not actually ordered to kill them, and you are not ordered to save them. They do not say, "Would you kindly," during those. They just say, "You should do this," or "You should do that." It's just, there's a lot of things, like, there's 5 religious beliefs and philosophies within the different, within the 2 games. So, for instance, in a public debate with Sophia Lamb, Ryan said that individuals have a right to practice religion in private, but that there shall not be any form of public institutions in Rapture. Despite this, there are 5 sects of major beliefs by citizens in Rapture. There's the Great Chain, which is a belief in self-interest and free markets, which unite the people in their forward progress. This is more of a philosophy than a religion, and it is a belief promoted by Andrew Ryan, who is a staunch atheist. Then there's the Rapture Family, which everyone owes each other a sense of unity and brotherhood with religious fervor. This was the most recent cult to have appeared in Rapture, having been created and promoted by Sophia Lamb and Simon Wells. Then, of course, there is Christianity, belief in the Christian God and Christ as the Savior of humanity. This is an underground religion in Rapture, as it is officially banned as an organized religion. The ban enabled smugglers to make money from smuggling many religious artifacts and gave fuel to demented religious fanaticism. Then there's atheism, the disbelief in a metaphysical god or survival beings. This is the official philosophical stance of Rapture. And then there is the Saturnine, a dark pagan cult, having come into being as a result of heavy atom usage. Worshippers of this cult dressed themselves in leaves, drank human blood as well as cups full of plasmids, most likely raw Adam or Eve, that they called ambrosia. They also believe they have been touched by ancient gods. So this was just... what ended up happening was, it was a head-on fist fight between different philosophical beliefs and what people wanted to achieve. So that's what Bioshock 1 and 2 ended up becoming all about. But of course, now we move from Rapture and we go to Columbia. Why would he send his Savior unto us if we will not raise a finger for our own salvation? And though we deserve not his mercy, he has led us to this new Eden, a last chance for redemption, and the prophet shall lead the people to the New Eden. Columbia is a city floating in the sky in the primary setting of Bioshock Infinite. The city was commissioned by the United States government and founded by Zachary Hale Comstock as a symbol of American political and religious ideals. Columbia, capable of flight due to the scientific discoveries of physicist Rosalind Lutece, was completed in 1893 and seceded from the U.S. in 1902. So, an overview of Columbia. Columbia floats above the North American continent and is comprised of neoclassical buildings similar to those present within the White City of the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. The design relies heavily upon neoclassical and colonial American influences for its architecture. While reactors, propellers, and balloons are present throughout the city, its ability to float is due to quantum levitation, which allows objects to be suspended indefinitely. The city is also designed with rain catchers that collect water from precipitation in the clouds to keep the vegetation and populace supplied with water. Other technological wonders such as complex automatons, advanced weapons, recording devices, and even crude cybernetics were developed in Columbia. Columbia was designed with docking stations and propulsion devices to allow sections of it to move about independently. Columbia was constructed for long-distance travel, allowing for national and international tours with regular route across the United States. These routes featured periodic stops near major cities, connecting to relay stations which contain hidden transport rockets, which grant passage to Columbia via coded signal. Columbia's internal means of transportation include zeppelines, cargo barges, hovercrafts, gondolas, and skylines. Bridges are also automated to connect with different moving parts of the cities at various stations, scheduled like any other transportation system. So what was the purpose of this Columbia? The U.S. government intended Columbia to be a showcase of American exceptionalism. Through tours across various countries and lands, America would be capable of spreading its vision of the future and the American ideal to others. Through Rosalind Lutece's discovery of the Lutece particle, which held atoms at a fixed position, and supported by Zachary Hale Comstock, a charismatic American religious figure, the city of Columbia was created and presented at the 1893 Chicago World Fair. The city was launched to great fanfare and was later dispatched to distant shores. What began as an endeavor of achievement and hope went horribly wrong for the American government. In 1901, during the Boxer Rebellion, where American hostages had been taken, Columbia forces intervened without orders from the United States government and destroyed the city of Peking. The destruction of the city caused the death of untold Chinese civilians and demonstrated the danger that Columbia posed to the rest of the world. When the floating city was revealed to be heavily armed and to have acted on its own, a rift emerged between the leadership in Columbia and Washington, resulting in the floating city being called to American shores. In response, on July 6, 1902, Columbia seceded from the Union, and the following year disappeared into the clouds. Comstock now had complete control over the city and its people, who rallied to his beliefs and set to creating his ideal society. This emerging utopia had its flaws, though they were not seen as problems by its leadership. Comstock and his regime, the founders, believed that Columbia embodied the true society envisioned by the founding fathers of the United States, where white Anglo-Saxons ruled over the world and that their country served a higher purpose in civilizing through military might and propagating their particular brand of religion. To many Colombians, America had turned away from its divine purpose, having abandoned slavery, religion, militarism, and racial supremacy. America and the rest of the world were viewed with contempt, described as the Sodom below, a sinful and chaotic world which only deserved to be destroyed. Columbia, in comparison, was referred to as another ark for another time by its citizens, meaning the city was the only source of goodness and order, and once Columbia destroyed the rest of the world, everything could restart pure and anew under the city's absolute rule. Due to Comstock's dogma, Colombians had a very narrow perspective of American history. President Abraham Lincoln was labeled the apostate by Columbia for ending slavery. His killer, John Wilkes Booth, was revered as a saint. The Colombian perspective of the Civil War is that of a demonic Lincoln leading barbarous hordes against the saintly Confederates under a defied George Washington, underscoring Colombian beliefs about racial slavery as well as the anarchistic nature of the false America. With the city free from the United States anti-slavery and workers' safety laws, institutionalized racism and elitism were spread and legally enforced in Colombia. Anglo-Saxon supremacy was widely asserted by the upper class, mismatched with poor treatment of the immigrant working classes. There were constant paranoia over the foreign horde and anarchists due to the racial beliefs of the time, causing Colombian xenophobia and militarism. People of minority races, such as Africans, Native Americans, Asians, and Irish, were regularly subjugated in Colombia, with many working in fiefdom to power Colombia's industry. This was under the guise of employment, while some, such as the eventual Vox Populi leader Daisy Fitzroy, were brought in by force to serve as slaves or indentured servants. The more privileged classes led more leisurely lives. This all was justified by some with the belief that the minorities had risen above their station, and that their toil was just a form of penance. Others simply saw it as a source of cheap, expendable labor. As a result of this separation, minorities were largely relegated to menial labor with no opportunity for upward mobility, and asking for improvement was likely result in being attacked by the city police or worse. The hard labor workforce at Fink Manufacturing, well known for mistreating its workers, was chiefly comprised of the city's minority population and was closely supervised and controlled by heavily armed police officers. The majority of Colombia's working class lived in Finktown's shabby, crime-ridden, and diseased slums, a stark contrast to the clean, stately neighborhood of the upper classes. Those few who worked in an area where the founders dominated were expected to be servile to their betters while dealing with inhumane working and living conditions. The rare few that worked in the homes of the elite might enjoy slightly better lives depending on their owners' generosity. In my opinion, Bioshock Infinite is more showing what happens with a religious extremism and what happens when religion rules your society. You get your very skewed viewpoint that matches your religion, and it's not always for the best. You know, it's an extreme view of the world with extreme leadership and punishments. It's kinda, yeah. Alright, well now let's look at the events of Bioshock Infinite. So, obviously, Bioshock Infinite is the third game in the series and takes place in the airborne city of Columbia in 1912. Oh, sorry. Where the player assumes the role of Booker DeWitt, a disgraced ex-Pinkerton agent. Booker has been given the job of finding a mysterious and powerful woman imprisoned in Colombia since birth named Elizabeth in order to wipe his debts away. And the story follows the unlikely duo as they journey to escape the flying city while discovering its twisted secrets. So, following in the footsteps of previous Bioshock games, the world of Infinite explores the chaos that results when strong ideals are taken to an extreme. Here, the philosophical concept of American exceptionalism is perverted into ultra-nationalism, religious fanaticism, and social Darwinism. Flags, patriotic music, and propaganda posters promote the ideas that Colombia is a haven from the so-called unwanted of the world. So, in 1912, Booker DeWitt is taken by the mysterious Lutece twins to an island lighthouse off the coast of Maine, with instructions from the Luteces to bring us the girl and wipe away the debt. DeWitt enters the structure, which houses a rocket silo that transports him into the flying city of Colombia. Booker's presence in Colombia goes unnoticed until a policeman identifies the letters A.D. branded onto the back of his hand. This is the sign of the false shepherd, which the city leader and prophet Zachary Comstock prophesies would lead the lamb, Elizabeth, astray and bring about Colombia's downfall. Booker, now a wanted man, fights his way to Monument Island, where Elizabeth is held within a tower. Along the way, he discovers a large device called the Siphon, and the ability Elizabeth wields, which can open tears, which are rips in the space-time continuum that leads to other parallel worlds. After freeing Elizabeth, her warden, the Songbird, a 30-foot-tall bird creature, attacks and destroys the tower she was held in, and Booker and Elizabeth narrowly escape with their lives. The pair work towards the First Lady's aerodrome, planning to take an airship to Paris, a city Elizabeth has always wanted to see. When Booker directs the ship to New York City with the intention of delivering Elizabeth to the Lutesses, she knocks him out and flees. He awakes to find the airship under the control of Daisy Fitzroy, leader of the Vox Populi. The Vox are a rebel organization made up primarily of those of the working class, foreigners, and people of color, all of whom suffer in some way at the hands of Columbia's government and society. Fitzroy offers to return the airship if Booker recovers a shipment of weapons from the slums of Columbia. Booker rejoins Elizabeth and they venture deeper into the city. While Elizabeth uses her ability to manipulate tears to aid in their journey, she grows disturbed by the psychological and physiological consequences of manipulating reality on Booker and the other citizens of Columbia. One tear leads them to a world where Booker has died and become a martyr of the Vox Populi, and the Vox are in the process of a violent revolt. That universe's Fitzroy believes that this Booker undermines her Booker's sacrifice, threatening to weaken the Vox Populi cause, and so turns her forces against him. Elizabeth is forced to kill Fitzroy to prevent her from executing a founder boy, and as she and Booker prepare to leave Columbia by airship, Songbird attacks and they crash back into the city. Realizing they cannot leave Columbia without stopping the Songbird, Booker and Elizabeth seek the instrument to control it. While continuing their search for escape, they begin to unravel a conspiracy behind the founding of the city. Through tears and a specter of Lady Comstock brought to life by Comstock using a siphon on Elizabeth. The Lutece twins are revealed as not actually siblings, rather they are two versions of the same quantum physicist from two different realities. Rosalind, the female Lutece, was originally of this reality, whereas Robert, the male, comes from another. Comstock had taken Elizabeth from his alternate self in Robert's universe and adopted her as his daughter, groomed to be the city's future leader. He had been rendered sterile and artificially aged from his use of the tear device while obtaining his prophecies. Comstock had the Lutesses construct the siphon to subdue her powers, then plotted their murder along with that of his wife to conceal the truth about Elizabeth's origin. Blade Lady Comstock's death on Daisy Fitzroy. However, in the process, Comstock inadvertently spread the Lutesses through the multiverse through the attempt on their lives, giving them the same power as Elizabeth. On reaching access to the Comstock house, Elizabeth is captured by Songbird and taken to the mansion. Booker follows, but is drawn into the future by an elderly Elizabeth who has suffered decades of torture and brainwashing in Booker's absence. She has inherited Comstock's cause and wages war on the world below. She reveals that Songbird would always stop Booker's rescue attempts in the past and implores him to stop this future from coming to pass by offering the means to control Songbird. Booker returns to the present to rescue Elizabeth, and the pair pursue Comstock to his airship. Comstock demands that Booker explain Elizabeth's past to her and why Elizabeth is missing a finger. Booker becomes enraged and drowns Comstock in his baptismal font when he begins to attack Elizabeth and blame Booker for all her hardships. Booker denies knowledge about Elizabeth's finger, but she asserts that he knows but does not remember. Booker decides to destroy the siphon so Elizabeth can access her full power and learn the truth. With Songbird under the control, the pair fend off a Vox Populi attack before ordering Songbird to destroy the siphon. When the device Booker used to control Songbird is destroyed, he attempts to attack them. Elizabeth opens a tear, transporting the three of them into the underwater city of Rapture. Booker and Elizabeth remain safe, but Songbird is transported outside in the water and is crushed by the immense pressure of the ocean. Elizabeth takes Booker to that reality's surface and lighthouse. They travel out through the building's door to a place outside space and time containing countless lighthouses and alternate versions of them. Elizabeth explains that they are within one of an infinite number of possible realities, hence the Bioshock Infinite, and drastically different due to choices that have been made. She shows Booker the truth that on October 8th, 1893, Robert Lutece approached him on behalf of Comstock, requesting that he give us the girl and wipe away the debt, referring to Booker's infant daughter, Anna DeWitt, the origin of Booker's AD branding. Booker reluctantly agreed to sell Anna in order to pay his gambling debts, but soon changed his mind. He arrived too late to stop Comstock escaping to Rosalind's universe through a tear, the closing of which severed the child's finger. Comstock subsequently raised Anna as Elizabeth, his daughter. Due to the severed finger, Elizabeth exists in two realities at once, her finger in Robert's reality and the rest of her body in Rosalind. This is what gives Elizabeth the ability to open and create tears at will. Later, Robert, feeling guilt for his actions, convinced Rosalind to help him bring Booker to Columbia and Rosalind's reality to rescue Elizabeth, hence the rowboat at the beginning of the game. Elizabeth explains that whatever actions Booker takes against Comstock will still remain alive in at least one of these universes. The Lutesses have tried to enlist Booker from different universes numerous times to end the cycle, but the result is always the same. The only way to break that cycle is to prevent Comstock from being created in the first place. Elizabeth transports Booker to the place he went to be baptized and cleansed of his sins after his actions at the Battle of Wounded Knee. Booker avoided baptism at the last second and later fathered his daughter Anna in Robert's universe, while in Rosalind's universe he took the baptism, found religion, became Comstock, and never had children. Comstock, sterile from exposure, was aware of his identity as Booker, and engineered Anna's abduction to provide him with a blood heir for Columbia. Booker and Elizabeth at the baptism are joined by alternate versions of Elizabeth from other universes. Booker allows them to drown him, preventing his baptismal choice from ever having been made, and thus stopping Comstock from ever existing. One by one, Elizabeths begin to disappear, the screen cutting to black before the original does. In a post-credits scene of Booker wakens in his apartment on October 8th, 1893, carrying a baby in the next room. He calls out for Anna, opens the door to her room before the screen cuts to black. So that right there is Bioshock Infinite. And I will tell you the story of Burial at Sea, the 2-episode DLC, because it's separate but the same, and we never actually got it. So, in the city of Rapture, Booker DeWitt is a well-known private investigator, handling his client's dirty works while not drinking and gambling. On the eve of 1959, a mysterious woman by the name of Elizabeth asks him to investigate the disappearance of a young girl named Sally. Elizabeth's intentions are vague, and she is unwilling to reveal any vital information, saying only that Sally is alive and the elite artist Sandra Cohen may have information regarding her whereabouts. The duo journey to Cohen's at High Street, but are denied entrance to the club, needing the masks specially crafted by the club's exclusive party guests. Booker and Elizabeth search the nearby shops, while with Elizabeth distracting the shopkeepers, Booker is able to retrieve the acquired mask, and the two are welcomed to Cohen's party. Yeah, they're very good. I would recommend playing it yourself, even if you know, like, what's going on. So, yeah, so Burial at Sea is a bunch of noir. So, Burial at Sea episode 1 is in Rapture. Episode 2, Elizabeth basks in Paris at the turn of the 20th century. However, she unexpectedly spots Sally and gives chase as she pursues her. Elizabeth's ideal vision of the French city turns nightmarish. Her memories of Columbia, Comstock, and Sally continue to haunt her. So, it would be fun to play these DLCs, but I don't have them, obviously, and, like, well, I guess I could see how much they are, and I could consider replaying Bioshock Infinite and the DLC specifically to do that, so let's go find that out. But yeah, that was, all of Bioshock, you know. 1 and 2 focus more on the idea of, like, a horror dystopian society when society collapses on itself, whereas Infinite is taken the other extreme, obviously. Yeah, that's $30 for episodes 1 and 2. That's not worth it. Well, I guess I could get the season pass, which includes Burial at Sea and everything else. Yeah. I don't know. I'll consider it. It would be nice to play something new. But, yeah, that's Bioshock and Bioshock Infinite. And then, of course, let me say this real quick. There's officially a new Bioshock game in the works. While we don't know if it's called Bioshock 4 or something entirely different, publisher 2K Games has announced that it's definitely on the way in a tweet announcing Cloud Chamber Studios, and restated again on Cloud Chamber's own website. While this may be your first time hearing about a new Bioshock, the first rumors began in April of 2019. It has been in the work for years. So, yes, there is more coming in terms of the Bioshock series. So, there is still a lot more coming, and you can expect another deep dive into some sort of extreme viewpoint. Religion, political, philosophical. I guess you can't really do political too much because a lot of games do explore those political extremisms and everything. So, but yeah, I mean, any game similar to this where it's, you've got it's got a lot of depth in it, and it really likes to drive in home a lot of different aspects and things. So, it's kind of like either way, no matter what happens, it's going to be a good game. And I really do look forward to hearing more information. The last thing we heard, I think, was in February. And that was before all the quarantine and everything. So, who knows how far that got pushed off so far. But I mean, we've got more Bioshock coming in the future, so that is something we can be excited for and look forward to. But, yeah. That's about all I have on Bioshock. It was nice diving deep into the series and just kind of talking about it, discussing what happened in it. And kind of just briefly touching upon the different stuff. It was a very nice overview. It was less of an overview, more of a semi-in-depth look at each of the games. We hit all the major plot points, the motivation behind everything that was done in the game, so yeah. Yeah, I got nothing else for today, so yeah, hearing it out loud really makes you go like, oh man, I watched it, or I played it, and I never realized that, or I never picked up that. That's why I like going over games like this, or series that have really big plot points is really nice, because it allows you to kind of think. We have another game series to go over soon that has some very big talking points that I'm just still trying to figure out how I want to do it. But we'll get to those soon. But anyway, that's going to be it for today. We're going to wrap up this little podcast. And we'll see you all again next week on the next podcast. So, thank you everybody for listening. I hope you all enjoyed. And until the next time, everybody, stay funky, people.